This is breaking news coming in right now, and the numbers flashing across my screen tell a story that could reshape the entire global trade conversation. 3 browser tabs are open in front of me, and I cannot stop refreshing them. One shows the latest container traffic through the port of Halifax. Another tracks monthly volume reports from the port of New York and New Jersey, and the third contains a diplomatic cable now circulating among international law scholars. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the updates as this story continues to unfold in real time. Because what we are witnessing is not just another chapter in an economic dispute. It is a moment that analysts, investors, and policymakers are already describing as unprecedented. The issue centers around a demand from Washington that stunned diplomats around the world. The proposal was simple in wording but enormous in implication. The United States asked Canada to share control of its ports and a portion of their revenue on the grounds that the trade moving through those ports should have been American in the first place. The language of that request triggered immediate reactions across financial and political circles. One of the most widely discussed responses came from legendary investor Warren Buffett, who has spent decades studying how competition unfolds between companies and entire industries. Buffett did not spend much time debating the demand itself. He dismissed it quickly, describing it as the diplomatic equivalent of a bankruptcy filing. Instead, he focused on what the demand reveals about the stage of competition Washington may have entered. Buffett explained that in more than 70 years of observing markets, he has seen the same pattern repeat again and again whenever a dominant competitor begins to lose its advantage. The pattern unfolds in stages. Stage 1 is denial. At first, the competitor that is gaining ground is dismissed entirely. Leaders say the challenger is too small, their products are inferior, their operations will never scale, and the threat is not serious. Stage 2 is imitation. By the time the incumbent realizes the challenger is growing quickly, it attempts to copy the model that made the competitor successful. But imitation usually arrives too late and often misunderstands the underlying strategy that made the model work. Stage 3 is aggression. This is when the established power fights back directly. Pricing wars begin, legal actions multiply, lobbying campaigns intensify, regulatory pressure is applied wherever possible. And then comes Stage 4. Stage 4, Buffett explained, is desperation. At this point, the incumbent no longer tries to outperform the competitor. Instead, it demands access to what the competitor has already built. The demand may take many forms. It may involve access to infrastructure, revenue-sharing arrangements, or attempts to control systems that someone else developed. Buffett's argument was blunt. When a competitor begins asking for the keys to someone else's operation rather than building its own alternative, it signals that the race has already been lost. According to his analysis, the request involving Canadian ports appears to fall squarely into that final stage. For decades, the United States operated the most powerful port infrastructure network in the world. American ports served as the gateway connecting the global economy to the largest consumer market on Earth. But over the past several years, something began to change. Trade routes gradually shifted. Shipping companies adjusted their logistics strategies. International commerce began flowing through different channels, and those channels increasingly ran through Canadian ports. Facilities in Halifax and Vancouver began attracting cargo that historically moved through American terminals. The reasons were not mysterious. Canadian ports offered faster customs processing, more stable trade agreements, and logistical systems designed to move goods quickly across the continent. Shipping companies follow efficiency. When costs drop and processing speeds improve, cargo routes adjust accordingly. That shift accelerated dramatically during the trade tensions of recent years. Tariffs, regulatory uncertainty, and fluctuating policies created complications for businesses operating through American ports. At the same time, Canada invested heavily in modernizing its own port infrastructure. The result was a gradual but measurable migration of trade routes. Container volumes in several Canadian ports surged as global shipping lines began routing more cargo through those facilities. Meanwhile, many American ports started reporting slower growth or outright declines in certain categories of international transit cargo. Those numbers set the stage for the demand that shocked the diplomatic community. Washington proposed a series of measures it described as bilateral cooperation between the two countries' port systems. Among the proposals were joint customs authority arrangements, preferential docking access for American cargo, and revenue sharing tied to trade flows passing through Canadian facilities. In practical terms, the proposal would have given American officials operational influence inside ports located on Canadian sovereign territory. The request was transmitted through formal diplomatic channels before being referenced publicly during a press conference. Canada's response arrived within hours. Prime Minister Mark Carney rejected the proposal in a statement that lasted only a few sentences. He emphasized that Canadian ports were built with Canadian investment, operated by Canadian workers, and governed by Canadian law. And then he delivered a line that quickly spread across global media outlets. You do not get the keys to a house you did not build just because your own house is empty. The metaphor landed immediately. Diplomats, economists, and commentators repeated the phrase across television networks and policy forums. The imagery was simple. One person builds a house from the foundation upward, invests resources, fills it with activity, and maintains it carefully. Another person stands outside asking for the keys because their own building is struggling. The message was unmistakable. International reaction followed quickly. Officials within the European Commission issued statements affirming that control of domestic port infrastructure remains a sovereign right of every nation. Trade representatives from Japan described the proposal as without precedent in modern commercial negotiations. Even the leadership of the World Trade Organization weighed in, reinforcing the principle that ports fall under the jurisdiction of the states that build and operate them. Inside the United States, the reaction was more complicated. Many American businesses rely on Canadian ports as part of their logistics networks. Thousands of companies already route cargo through Halifax or Vancouver because those routes offer practical advantages. Industry groups worried that escalating the dispute could trigger countermeasures, restricting access to those same facilities. The American Association of Port Authorities publicly emphasized that the competitive challenges facing U.S. ports should be addressed through investment and modernization rather than demands for access to foreign infrastructure. Several lawmakers from both major political parties voiced similar concerns. Some argued that the United States should focus on rebuilding its own port capacity rather than attempting to influence operations abroad. Analysts also pointed to the broader economic dynamics behind the issue. Canadian ports have experienced significant growth during the past few years, fueled by trade diversification strategies and expanding logistics corridors linking Asia, North America, and Europe. Halifax has emerged as a major North Atlantic hub for container traffic moving between continents. Vancouver and Prince Rupert have expanded their roles as gateways for Pacific trade, connecting Asian shipping routes to rail corridors that stretch across the Canadian interior. These developments created a transcontinental logistics network capable of moving goods efficiently from Pacific ports to Atlantic shipping lanes. In contrast, several American ports have struggled to maintain their previous share of international transit cargo. The Port of New York and New Jersey, once the dominant gateway on the East Coast, has seen container volumes decline as shipping lines experiment with alternative routes. On the West Coast, ports such as Los Angeles and Long Beach continue to handle enormous volumes of cargo, but face growing competition from Canadian facilities positioned closer to Asian shipping lanes. The numbers themselves tell the story. Canadian port revenue has increased sharply during the past several years as container traffic grows and new trade agreements attract additional commerce. At the same time, projections for certain American ports have been revised downward as some shipping routes shift northward. Economists emphasize that these changes are driven largely by logistics efficiency and trade policy environments rather than by any single political decision. Shipping companies operate on narrow margins. Even small improvements in processing speed or cost can influence the routes they choose. When cargo begins flowing consistently through one network instead of another, the shift can quickly become structural rather than temporary. That is why the recent demand captured so much attention. To many observers, it appeared less like a negotiation tactic and more like a signal of deeper strategic frustration. Buffett's analysis returned to that point. In his view, demanding access to a competitor's infrastructure reveals an uncomfortable truth. The competitor has already built something that cannot easily be replicated. The moment the request is made, the balance of power becomes visible. Because if the capability could be rebuilt domestically, the demand would not be necessary. This brings the story to a critical crossroads. There are two possible paths forward. The first involves a long-term investment strategy inside the United States. That would require rebuilding port infrastructure, modernizing customs systems, negotiating new trade agreements, and restoring competitiveness over time. Such an effort would take years and cost enormous sums of money. The second path involves escalating political pressure and continuing to challenge Canada's growing influence within global shipping networks. Each new demand, however, risks pushing trade partners further toward alternative arrangements that bypass American ports entirely. For now, the global shipping industry is watching carefully. Ports are not just transportation hubs. They are physical indicators of economic momentum. Full harbors mean goods are moving, supply chains are active, and commerce is expanding. Empty terminals tell a different story, and that is why the debate over Canadian port control has become such a powerful symbol within the broader trade conflict. It raises a question that economists and policymakers are now asking with increasing urgency. Where does economic power truly reside? Is it measured by the size of a nation's economy, or by the infrastructure that allows that economy to connect with the rest of the world? When trade routes shift, they reshape more than shipping schedules. They redefine alliances, investment patterns, and long-term geopolitical influence. That is why the response from Ottawa resonated so widely. The statement was brief, but its meaning extended far beyond one negotiation. You do not demand the keys to a house you did not build, you build your own. And as container ships continue moving across the Atlantic and Pacific, that message is echoing through boardrooms, government offices, and shipping terminals around the world. Stay with this channel and make sure you are subscribed, because this story is still developing, and the next move in this global trade chess match could arrive at any moment.